Are you ready to witness the most shocking breakup in high society history? The Russell Empire is crumbling from the inside out, and New York will never be the same. Bertha Russell has made her final move, and this time, she is leaving George behind after 3 seasons of watching Bertha Russell stop at nothing to conquer New York society. The ultimate cost of her ambition has finally been paid. What began as a fierce partnership between a ruthless robber baron and a relentless social climber has officially turned into a battlefield. For years, George stood by Bertha, using his massive railroad fortune to buy her way into the most exclusive ballrooms, opera houses, and summer cottages in Newport. Together, they seemed completely unstoppable, breaking through the iron gates of old money and forcing elite society to bow to their wealth. But power always comes with a price tag, and Bertha was more than willing to spend everything they had, including their own daughter's happiness. When Bertha arranged the marriage between Gladys and the Duke of Buckingham, she believed she was securing the ultimate crown for her family. However, she severely miscalculated the toll it would take on her marriage. George is a man who built a business empire by destroying anyone who got in his way, but his hard rule was always protecting his family. Seeing Gladys turned into a bargaining chip for a European title was the one line George told Bertha she could never cross. Throughout the entire ordeal, the tension in the Russell mansion grew thicker with every passing day, turning their lavish home into a cold, silent prison. The glowing chandeliers and gilded walls could no longer hide the reality that their union was fractured beyond repair. Bertha believed that once the victory was won, George would eventually fall in line and celebrate her triumph like he always did. But George saw her actions not as a victory, but as a betrayal of the deepest kind. He realized that Bertha's hunger for social dominance would never be satisfied, and that she valued a place at the top of society more than the love and trust they had shared for decades. The final breaking point arrives during a heated late-night confrontation inside George's private study. Surrounded by expensive cognac, dark wood paneling, and maps of his expanding train lines, George confronts Bertha with an ultimatum she never expected to hear. He tells her plainly that he will no longer fund a lifestyle that trades their children's freedom for empty aristocratic titles. He demands that she choose between her endless social games and her commitment to their home. For any other woman in the 19th century, a husband's word would be the end of the argument, forcing her to fall back into line and submit. But Bertha Russell is not any other woman. She looks at the empire they built together and realizes something terrifying. She no longer needs George to command the room. Her position in society, though bought with his money, has now become her own personal power base. She refuses to back down, arguing that every sacrifice she made was to elevate the Russell name to a level where no one could ever look down on them again. She accuses George of being weak at the exact moment they reached the peak of their influence. The silence that follows her sharp words is heavier than any argument they have ever had. Bertha realizes that as long as she stays under George's roof, her actions will always be judged by his rules. Instead of bowing down, she makes a choice that will send shockwaves through every dining room on Fifth Avenue. Without shedding a single tear, she turns her back on her husband, walks out of the study, and orders her servants to pack her trunks. She is leaving the grand mansion on 61st Street, abandoning the man who gave her everything. To prove that she can hold the crown entirely on her own, the fallout from Bertha's sudden exit ripples across Fifth Avenue like a tidal wave, tearing through the gilded halls of New York's elite before the sun even rises. The morning papers carry indirect whispers of a rift in the Russell household, but the high society parlors already know the truth. For years, the formidable old money faction led by Mrs. Astor and Agnes van Rhijn viewed Bertha Russell as a temporary nuisance, a loud outsider throwing money round to buy a throne she did not deserve. Now, seeing her walk away from the very fortune that gave her leverage changes everything. Agnes van Rhijn greets the news with a cold, victorious smirk over her morning tea, convinced that without George's limitless bank account, Bertha will quickly crumble into obscurity. Marian Brooke watches the scandal unfold with deep concern, knowing how much collateral damage a public split causes in a world where a woman's reputation is her only real currency. Meanwhile, the grand hostesses of the city begin recalculating their guest lists, unsure of who holds the actual power in the Russell name. Is Bertha still the reigning queen of Newport without the robber baron behind her? Or is she now a vulnerable target that society can finally crush? Across town, the shift in power creates a dangerous vacuum that threatens to upend both social circles and financial markets. Bertha does not retreat into the shadows to mourn her marriage. Instead, she sets up her own base of operations, taking over a lavish hotel suite and making it clear that her social calendar will not pause for a single afternoon. Her bold presence stuns her enemies, who expected her to go into hiding or beg George for forgiveness. Mrs. Astor realizes that a single Bertha Russell, unburdened by her husband's moral lectures, might actually be more dangerous than ever before. Bertha begins holding her own intimate gatherings, inviting ambitious young families and international guests who are hungry for influence rather than ancient traditions. This strategic move threatens to split New York society straight down the middle, forcing every prominent family to choose a side. You are either with the traditional establishment at the Academy of Music, or you are with Bertha's modern, uncompromising vision. The rivalry is no longer just about who throws the grandest ball. It has evolved into a full-scale social war for the future control of high society, and Bertha is playing to win at all costs inside the quiet halls of the Russell mansion. The silence left behind is deafening, leaving George to face a cold reality he never anticipated. He stands alone in the massive rooms he bought to showcase his wife's success, realizing that all his money could not buy the one thing he actually cared about, a united home. The servants move on tiptoe, terrified of triggering the famous temper of a man who routinely destroys rival railroad titans before breakfast. Yet George is not just angry. He is deeply wounded. He spent years fighting court battles, bribing politicians, and risking his entire fortune just to see Bertha smile at the top of a grand staircase. Watching her abandon him the moment he tried to protect their daughter cuts deeper than any business loss he has ever suffered. However, sadness quickly turns into a cold, dangerous resolve. George Russell is not a man who accepts defeat, whether in the boardroom or in his private life. He realizes that by walking out, Bertha has drawn a line across his entire empire, and for the first time, the ruthless methods he used against his financial enemies might be turned toward the woman he loved. The deepest fracture occurs right in the middle of the family, forcing Gladys and Larry to navigate the wreckage of their parents' war. Gladys finds herself trapped in a nightmare of her mother's making, legally bound to marry a duke she barely knows while her father desperately tries to break the engagement. Bertha views the upcoming royal wedding as her ultimate shield, believing that once her daughter becomes a duchess, society will never be able to cast her out, regardless of her marital status. Gladys, who spent her whole life being pushed around like a decorative piece on her mother's chessboard, suddenly realizes she has to make a choice. Does she stay loyal to her father, who is fighting for her freedom, or does she follow her mother's path of ruthless ambition? Meanwhile, Larry is caught in the crossfire, trying to keep his own career and independence alive while his family name is dragged through the mud. Every decision made in the Russell family now carries a heavy price tag, setting up a clash where personal loyalty, massive wealth, and raw power will collide like never before as night falls over the city. The conflict moves from grand drawing rooms into the dark, cutthroat world of high-stakes finance and quiet backroom deals. George Russell is no longer just a heartbroken husband sitting alone in an empty mansion. The robber baron has fully awakened, and his focus has turned to total retaliation. He begins quietly pulling his financial backing from every charity, opera board, and social committee where Bertha holds influence. In the 19th century, high society runs on money just as much as bloodlines, and George knows exactly where to cut the lines to make Bertha feel the pressure. Every grand event Bertha tries to organize suddenly faces massive budget cuts, caterers backing out at the last minute, and venue owners making polite excuses to cancel her reservations. George uses his massive railroad network and Wall Street connections to send a clear message to the entire city: anyone who aligns with Bertha will find themselves cut off from the Russell fortune. He intends to starve her social ambition until she has no choice but to realize that her power was built entirely on his foundation, turning the very city she tried to conquer into a wall of closed doors. Bertha, however, refuses to be starved out and launches a brilliant counterattack that shocks the financial elite. She realizes that while George controls the banks and the train lines, she controls something just as valuable: access to international aristocracy and the prestige every wealthy American family desperately craves. Instead of relying on New York money, Bertha reaches across the Atlantic, using her strong connection with the Duke of Buckingham to court foreign investors, European nobility, and wealthy British lords who are eager to put their gold into American markets. She begins setting up private financial circles right out of her hotel suite, bypassing George's traditional networks completely. By connecting hungry young American businessmen directly with European royalty, she turns herself into an indispensable broker of global power. She is no longer just playing the role of a high society hostess. She is stepping directly into George's territory as a power player in business. This bold move proves to everyone that Bertha does not need George's permission or his checkbook to build an empire, setting off a quiet panic among the traditional Wall Street barons who never expected a woman to manipulate global markets so effortlessly. The escalating war between husband and wife begins to trigger massive tremors across the entire American economy, drawing the attention of powerful political figures and rival tycoons. George's competitors quickly realize that the mighty titan of the railroad industry is distracted by a personal war, and they waste no time trying to exploit the rift. Rival railroad owners start launching secret hostile takeovers of George's smaller train lines, while corrupt politicians threaten to pass new regulatory laws while his attention is divided. At the same time, Bertha's growing influence with foreign aristocrats attracts intense legal scrutiny, as powerful families worry that her moves could destabilize local markets or transfer too much American wealth overseas. What started as a bitter personal split between two proud people in a Fifth Avenue study has officially exploded into a nationwide economic crisis. The news outlets begin running daily headlines speculating on whether the Russell Empire will survive the storm. As to brilliant, ruthless minds spend millions of dollars every single week just to strike a blow against each other, completely unconcerned with the damage left in their wake. In the middle of this economic wildfire, the emotional core of their former love turns into their sharpest weapon, with both George and Bertha using their intimate knowledge of each other to inflict maximum damage. George knows Bertha's deepest fear is being laughed at by old money, so he begins attending elite events on the arm of subtle, traditional society figures, sending a quiet signal that he is moving on without her. Bertha knows George's proudest achievement was building a family legacy, so she accelerates the plans for Gladys's grand wedding in England, intending to move their daughter permanently across the ocean, where George will have little control over her daily life. Every move is calculated, cold, and executed with mathematical precision. Yet beneath the anger and strategic strikes, a dark reality settles over both of them. They are two halves of the same unstoppable force, and in trying to destroy each other, they are tearing down the very world they spent their entire lives building together. The grand clash reaches its absolute breaking point as the scene shifts across the ocean to London, setting the stage for the most dramatic spectacle the transatlantic elite has ever witnessed. Bertha Russell arrives in England like a conquering queen, determined to execute the grand wedding of Gladys and the Duke of Buckingham with unmatched, blinding grandeur. She pours every remaining resource into making this event an undeniable triumph, renting massive estates in the English countryside and hosting breathtaking balls that outshine even the royal court. For Bertha, this wedding is no longer just about securing a title for her daughter. It is her ultimate, irreversible statement of independence from George. She wants the world to see that while George Russell may control the steel tracks of America, she commands the grandest stage in high society on a global scale. Every floral arrangement, every gilded invitation, and every peer of the realm in attendance is designed to prove that she succeeded without the man who claimed she would fail on her own. Back in New York, George realizes that time has completely run out, forcing him to make a desperate move that could destroy everything he spent his lifetime building. Knowing that once Gladys officially signs the marriage contracts under British law, she will be lost to him forever, George boards a high-speed ocean liner to cross the Atlantic, bringing the war directly to British soil. But he is not traveling merely as an anxious father, begging for a second chance. He is arriving as a ruthless tycoon, ready to pull down the entire structure. George quietly contacts the Duke's heaviest British creditors, buying out the vast debts attached to the Duke's crumbling family estates. By doing so, George turns the tables in an instant, instead of the Duke using the Russell wealth to save his family name. George now holds the legal power to foreclose on the Duke's ancestral castle before the vows are even spoken. He lands in England with a financial weapon capable of stopping the entire wedding in its tracks, setting up a breathtaking standoff that pits raw, cold cash against centuries of aristocratic pride. The final confrontation between George and Bertha unfolds on the eve of the wedding inside the towering, shadowy library of the Duke's historic estate. Outside, rain pours over the manicured grounds, while inside, husband and wife stand face to face for the first time since Bertha walked out of the 6th First Street mansion. The air is thick with decades of shared history, deep love, and scorching resentment. George lays out his cards, making it clear that he will liquidate the Duke's entire estate and plunge the aristocratic family into public bankruptcy tomorrow morning if Bertha forces Gladys into this loveless union. Bertha, standing tall in a magnificent Parisian gown, refuses to flinch, reminding George that destroying the Duke will also brand their daughter as a public failure in the eyes of the global press. They stand inches apart, two terrifying titans who built an empire together, now staring into the abyss of mutual annihilation where neither side is willing to blink first. As the morning light breaks over the chapel, the entire world holds its breath to see who will break first in this high-stakes game of emotional chicken. Gladys stands in her exquisite bridal room in front of a full-length mirror, holding the key to her own destiny, as the carriage waits outside. In this final, pulse-pounding climax, every choice carries a devastating price tag. If Bertha backs down, her social authority is shattered forever. If George strikes the blow, he destroys his daughter's standing and burns his last remaining bridge to Bertha. And if the wedding goes forward, the Russell family is permanently torn in two. The camera pans slowly across the silent crowd, the tense faces of high society, and the cold, unreadable expressions of George and Bertha as the chapel doors slowly begin to open, leaving the fate of the Russell dynasty hanging by a single thread. The curtain falls on Season 4, Episode 1, leaving the audience breathless, stunned, and desperately screaming for the next chapter. This is no longer just a story about rich people in fancy clothes. It is an epic war of two unstoppable forces who would rather see the world burn than admit defeat. Bertha has proven that her vision extends far beyond Fifth Avenue, and George has shown that no amount of ocean or distance can keep him from protecting what he considers his. But as the final credits prepare to roll, one lingering question hangs over the entire wreckage of the Russell dynasty. When two people who love each other this fiercely turn that same passion into absolute destruction, can anything truly survive the fallout? Every dynamic that built this show has been permanently shattered and flipped on its head. The line between villain and hero has completely dissolved, leaving viewers completely divided on who to root for. Is Bertha a visionary pioneer breaking free from a controlling husband to claim her rightful throne? Or is she a cold, heartless mother, sacrificing her own blood for an empty title? Is George a devoted father making the ultimate heroic stand for his daughter? Or is he a bitter, controlling tyrant who cannot handle a woman who no longer needs his permission. There are no clean answers anymore. Only raw consequences, massive financial stakes, and broken hearts wrapped in silk and lace. This massive premiere sets the stage for a season unlike anything we have ever seen in television drama. The entire global balance of high society has been rewritten in a single hour, and the ripples will be felt from the grandest estates in London to the trade floors of Wall Street. Friends will be forced to pick sides, secrets will be traded like currency, and the Russell name will either become the undisputed royal family of the new age or the most famous tragedy in American history. The stage is set, the weapons are drawn, and the battle for the Gilded Age has officially begun. What do you think will happen next in this epic war? And who do you think will come out on top when the dust finally settles? Drop your wild theories in the comments below, smash that like button, and subscribe so you never miss another deep breakdown of your favorite dramatic sagas.